just rewritten it so it's much, for JavaScript developers, it's going to look much more familiar. And it's, I think, in my opinion, this is going to be a more maintainable way of doing it, modularizable and all of that, until the GraphQL team comes up with some crazy crazy thing for, you know, sharing some code in multiple files. Let me show you. So right now what we have is basically the user's get endpoint, as if we were to translate it to REST. If we want to get a user by ID, for example, we are kind of in a bad position right now. There's no filter whatsoever. Let's implement that. Even with one hand, I can implement it. So there's the same query type. You see, there are the users over there. Let's not do that. There are the users, which returns a list, GraphQL list of type user, and then we can define some arguments on it. This is the thing I'll show you in a second, that I deleted from the first example, and I quickly just wanted to show you how this works. If I go to localhost 4000, now I should have, on the users, I should have filters available. And you can see you don't have to have much of domain knowledge to, you know, click or press Control Space, but we can give it a value, and the value should filter for, let's just type something, Control Space again, the field, again, first name, operation, and we can pick whatever we want. If we run that, we can get a user by its first name. We can query that. Let me show you the implementation. But the cool thing about this is that you don't have to read like long pages of documentation to know what's exposed in an API. You can just pull up your browser, play around with it, and then you can use this same code, this very same code on the left-hand side that that we wrote here. Put it into your, you know, React app, your Vue app. Use the components provided by Apollo, and then basically you're done with the data fetching. Let me go back and show you the exact implementation for these filters. So I have the filter, which is of type, again, user filter type, and if we check the user filter type, it exposes a value, which can be a string, and then there's a field, which is a user field. And the cool thing about it is, you can define an enum. That means no invalid values can come to your API. It's going to be validated for free. You don't have to use like extra validation layers, extra validation libraries in your app. If I go back to the browser, try to misspell it, it's going to give me an error. Expected type this, did you mean first name? That's so cool. I mean, it just autocorrects my coding. If we go back, and so there's first name and last name, and then I can give them values. These are the values that it will use it to deserialize the request. And we have a field, we have an operation, and in the operation again, it's an enum that defines equal and like, and that's what we can use to then later on query for these fields. And the querying itself and the filtering itself will not be done automatically, but you have this resolve function over here. And in the resolve function, just for demonstration purposes, I log out the filters, and how these filters look like is something like this. Basically, after all the validation that it has done, after all the parsing and everything, it gives you like a plain JavaScript object that you can work with. It's going to be so much easier now that we have that. we can just map over this collection of users and then do some magic of filtering, and that will, in case of equality, in case of like. Instead of that, again, I mentioned this is storage layer agnostic. What we have here is a static, like a JSON compiled into the app, but instead of this, you can have a database, you can build your own queries, you can do whatever you'd like. Basically, GraphQL will give you all the necessary layers to parse and give you all the validation and stuff like that. And whatever you return from this resolve function will be returned in your GraphQL API. And there's one extra step that we have to take to remake the whole RESTful approach, and that's creating the user. So we need to do git check. For. And then you see already there's commit there, which tells you that we added a new thing. And in our API here, we have a query. We can give it a name. We can also browse it like this, but it's not what I wanted to show. Let's call it 1, because it's short, and I don't have to type. And we have the mutation. So we have queries for data retrieval, and we have mutations that will mutate state. What we have here is in the mutation, again, not only we have to refresh, but we also have to start the server. 1, 2. That's done. So now we have the mutation, we have the page reloaded, we have the create user, which takes some arguments. Let's see what kind of arguments it takes. It takes an input, and it takes a first name. Right now the UI itself is pretty flaky, but you can imagine that I can specify the first name, last name. It's pretty hard to type with one hand, still not used to it. Okay, and not only you can define what you want to create, but also if you're used to using REST, what you usually are doing is like, okay, there's this post endpoint, and after this post endpoint, I'm just going to hit that with the same ID to retrieve the data. In GraphQL, you can specify what you want to, your API to return, and then I can just ask for the first name, last name, and email. Sorry. And if I run that, right here, I got an error. Let's ignore that for now. So what we have is basically our implementation right here, which is mutation type, and this is the root mutation type, which takes a create user, which returns a user. You can define what it returns, and that's why it knew that what fields it's going to, what you are able to query when you're trying to get a return value. And there are the arguments, and in the arguments there's the input and there's the user input type. In GraphQL, input types are different from what you would consider a response type. But you call new GraphQL object, input object type, and then you can specify, okay, I want a string here. And all of these three are going to be our new strings. And basically, what we do is some sophisticated algorithm for saving the new user. Maybe a bug creeped in the last hour, I'm not sure. The thing is that this is basically the easiest way you can implement your own GraphQL API. And you can leverage this tooling for all of those things that I already mentioned, which is basically the discoverability aspect, onboarding of new developers, And it's not just for others